Exploring Scrum Team performance with my friends in Atlanta. Let's do this thing. All right. So let me start off with first telling you a little bit about, wait, hold on. How do I get rid of this red dot? You guys see a red stripe there, don't you? That's going to bug me. That is going to bug me. I'm going to have to figure that out. What is going on with that thing? Maybe it's annotate. Let me clear that. Clear all drawings. Oof, man. That feels good. That was, I don't think I could have, I couldn't have kept that going. That was going to make me crazy. So yeah, definitely don't want to do that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about improving. That's the company that Glenn and I both work for. What do we do? Improving. The area that I'm in is in the training and coaching area. And so we deliver training. We deliver it on the scrum.org content. Also, Pro Kanban is another organization that delivers Kanban training. That is an organization I'm affiliated with. We also do application development, consulting services. Glenn's one of our coaches. Glenn does both some agile type coaching, but also does technical coaching. So he is definitely one of our talented folks. So I'm really excited to get to see Glenn and get to spend a little time with him and the rest of you here. We also do recruiting services. And so this is what Improving does. We also just love helping people learn, love helping people grow. And so we do stuff like this. And we also do like kind of a weekly Improving Talks series. And so you can check that out too. A little bit about me. I joined Improving back in April 2019. I started off as a coach and then became part of their training department after I got my professional Scrum trainer license. You can see some of the different classes I teach here. There's also a link to my website, which is soloscrum.com. And you can see some of the companies that I've supported over the years, and that's me. All right, so let's start off with learning objectives. What am I hoping that you're going to walk away with? First, what we're going to do is we're just going to look at like metrics, right? Some of the metrics that we're probably all somewhat familiar with in the Agile and Scrum world. We'll talk about why should we even bother with them? A lot of times people are like, oh, ugh, metrics, we hate them. And I'm with you. If there's no value to them, ugh, don't like them. But if there is value to them, then what can we expect out of them? And then we're going to talk about some Scrum Team performance metrics that I've experimented with, and I've also gleaned from other people doing this workshop. That's one of the things I think is pretty cool about doing this workshop is I hear from other folks, and that's why I want us to feel okay to chime in and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll think about how we're going to try to make this make a change at work based on what we went through tonight. So always like to start off with, why do we use Scrum? Right? What's the purpose of using Scrum? Some places you may see, we're going to do twice the work in half the time. Really catchy book title, but not really the big thing that Scrum helps you do. What Scrum does help you do, though, is it helps you focus. That second bullet point, that's a phrase that I love to share with people. We want to work on the right thing at the right time all the time. And that's kind of one of the things we get from our product owner. We also are looking to get incremental delivery of value. Now that's gonna be something that we hit on quite a bit in this in the first part of this workshop. We're also going to be looking for getting feedback, right? We want to always create something that's high quality, high value, but that high value, unfortunately, that's optional because we don't actually know what's going to be valuable. We have a hypothesis, but we don't know for sure. And so what we want to do is we want to get that feedback and we want to learn from our customers. So I told you we're going to focus on value. So let's do that right now. When we look at what is the primary measure of performance, like first and foremost, how do we measure performance? Let's go to the Scrum Guide and let's see what the Scrum Guide says. And it says that each sprint, the entire Scrum team is accountable for creating a valuable and useful increment. Now, sometimes when people hear increment, like they're like, well, that's kind of some technical language. What's going on there? What we mean is that we've made an update to our product that is valuable and is useful. And we want that every single sprint. Now, what's a sprint? Is it the thing that we're going to have to like break out some sweatbands and all that kind of stuff? No. If I'm talking to my Scrum people, you know that a sprint is just a container. It's just a time box. It's the heartbeat of Scrum. You'll see that. And what we're using is we're using the sprint to help us have a cadence for getting feedback. And that's also a way that we mitigate risk. But the whole thing about Scrum is we've got to produce done work. That's the reason that Scrum is tolerated. And I say that word specifically. Scrum is tolerated in organizations because we actually produce value. So let's look at another source. What's our primary measure of performance? Why don't we take a look at the Agile Manifesto? We've got actually 3 principles that all talk about the same thing, right? Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now, here's the deal. When the different folks that our Scrum folks, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, they were at that meeting in Snowbird, Utah back in 2001. We had some folks from the Crystal community, folks from XP. We had like all these software people, and their whole deal was, we think that there's better ways to deliver software. But here's what's neat though, is what we found is creating and delivering software, it's just a type of complex problem. It's for sure a complex problem, but what we found is that we can use the principles and values of Agile, and we can use Scrum, not just for software, but for other complex problems. So whenever we see this thing about valuable software, we can just say that that's any type of product, not just software. And so and I want you to see number 3 there, that other principle, also talking about we want to deliver value frequently. Then that last one, number 7, this is where we just stick the flag in the ground and say, wait, how do we know if we're any good? How do we know if we're accomplishing good stuff? Because if we have working product, see, I paraphrase the software, that's our primary measure of progress. Do we have working stuff? So I want you to know right now at the very beginning here, that is the absolute most important thing. If you're not delivering value, if you're not getting done work, that's a problem. And that should be a problem as a Scrum Master that you attack head on, that you figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to change? You get your team focused on, like, let's figure that out no matter what, right? So that is our most important measure. We're going to talk about some other measures too. So we'll talk about
that's part of the approach of stop starting and start finishing.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. We want to finish stuff, not just endlessly work on stuff. We want to finish stuff because that's how we'll be able to get that feedback, right? Love that. Thanks for adding that, Glenn. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple of common tools that people may be used to seeing. So we'll start off with our good old friend, the velocity chart. All right, so we've got our velocity chart, and here's what I want to do, just in case someone's watching, like, I don't know what a velocity chart is. I'm going to give them the quick version of this. The quick version of a velocity chart is we're measuring the amount of stuff that was done in previous sprints. That's it. The amount of stuff done in previous sprints. That's all velocity is. It's just a measure of done stuff. And if we've done it through estimates, what we'll do is we'll just total up those estimates of our done work. And that's how we build a velocity chart. So now what I want to do is, and you guys said you're going to be cool with us interacting while this recording's going. So I'm going to trust you on that. And I'm going to throw this question out there to you. How is velocity useful? How is it not useful? What do you say?
I feel like velocity is useful in a matter of like being able to be able to predict how many stories that the team will be able to complete, but it cannot be useful because they can compare, like if another team delivers 64 and another team delivers 40, they average that velocity, they think that's measuring performance, and it's not used to measure performance. It's used to just come up with an average of amount of stories so we can be predictable to the customer. Sorry, my daughter.
No, you're good. And Raven, if you had your camera on, I'd call for the internet high five, right? Nice. Yes, one of the things that makes velocity not useful at all is when we use that as a performance measure. Oh, this is a good team. They did 75 points. Ooh, this is a bad team. They only did 15 points. Boo. That is terrible use of velocity. Now, what you said, though, is velocity is something that we can use to kind of look into the future. Now, you said the word predict. I want to tweak that just a little bit and say forecast. We can use what we've done in the past as an indicator of what we might do in the future, and we can create a forecast. What are some factors that might affect our forecast?
Capacity.
Capacity of the team.
Yeah, for sure, right? Capacity. Let's take a look at that chart there that's in the background. If I were just to ask you, right, and we're saying that those green bars, those are the ones that are showing us the work that was done. If we were to look at those at this bar chart just at a glance, and we said, like, which sprint was the worst one, what would you guys say?
No, this sprint sets in 1-3.
Sprint 13, right? It's the one that has the lowest bar. What if I were to tell you that these are 2-week sprints, right? These are 2-week sprints, and sprint 13 is the sprint that's from December 15th to December 31st. Oh, now all of a sudden that thing that Nanad said really comes into play. The capacity of the team. Like, you find out that there was a 10-person team and there were 2 people that had ran themselves out of paid time off. And that's happened to me, by the way. There was a team that I experienced that, and they still got stuff done. All of a sudden you're like, man, this is a rock star team. They got stuff done when everybody was gone. So we want to make sure that we look at this in context, and capacity can absolutely affect our velocity. That's why I don't think it's good for us to put too much stock into a single sprint worth of data, because we might have a crazy sprint and then like a sprint that felt a whole lot more normal. What else can affect our velocity? Someone throw some ideas out.
I would say technical debt. I've worked
sure.
in places wherein it threw my sprints around 4 to 5 sprints completely off track, wherein I have met major failures because of technical debt.
Thank you, JT. Yes, absolutely. Our technical debt, it's like we're putting rocks in a backpack, right? And we get slower and slower, and it becomes harder and harder to get things done. Absolutely, our technical debt can slow down our velocity. What if we were to make changes to our team composition? Think that can make a difference? I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen where we had a super talented dude that was on the team. And like, we didn't really realize that this was the dude that was holding everything together. He was sort of like the, I'm not gonna say puppet master, that sounds weird, but like he was the one that like everybody came to, and then he got another job. And all of a sudden the team was like, they felt like there was a huge gaping hole where this person had been. And so that also affected the amount of stuff that the team could get done, right? So I think we've talked about some things. Go ahead, Glenn.
I'd say it's not even necessarily about somebody getting a new job, but if management shuffles people around,
sure,
because they're focused on that mythical man month, as the book alludes to, right?
Yep.
So then they're like,
absolutely,
well, if I move this developer around and put this other one here, I got the same number of people on the team, I should get the same output.
Yeah, person's a person. Let's just stick another person in there and let's just shuffle people around. Yeah, it's crazy, right? And so what we can see is that velocity, it has a use, but there's also some misuse around velocity. Let's look at another one. How about burndown charts? Let's take a look at those. Burndown charts. Like, and for those of you who are watching, maybe you haven't seen this before, all the burndown chart measures is the stuff that we've got planned to do. Right? In sprint planning, we come up with the stuff that we think we're going to be able to get done. Now, we could do that with estimates. We could do that with just number of items. We might break down our work into smaller pieces that are going to allow us a little bit more ability to track their progress, which is what I hope for if we're doing that. And so what we do is we get that amount of items, and that's our vertical axis. And then our horizontal axis, all that is the amount of time that we have, which is based on our sprint. And so when we have that, we can do this projection that says here is when we feel like we should get it done. Here's the trajectory we're going after. So now let me ask you guys, Burndown charts, how is it useful? How is it not useful?
I think I liked how you just kind of indicated that you want to use the slope to figure out when you'll be done. So if the slope extends past the end of the sprint, then you recognize that you're not going to do all the things you thought you were going to be able to do, and you need to take a look at how to limit the scope of the things you're going to do or cut some things out so that you do deliver by the end.
Yeah, I dig it.
I think the pitfall is, somebody sees a chart like that and it kind of implies, okay, you should get everything done because we have a chart that tracks whether or not you got everything done.
Yep.
And you run into a problem.
Yeah, for sure. Where would we feel the most uncomfortable about that conversation coming from? Not sure if I said that right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get what you're saying. It's, the manager that walks by down chart or the
Yes. Okay, we hit it. This is a super great tool for use within the team, right? This is a visualization that helps us see, are we on track? Are we doing okay? If not, hey, it could be a great indicator of like, hey, what are we going to do? Maybe as we're going along, we start to figure out, you know what? We might have bitten off more than we can chew. Well, if we're the developers on the team and we realize it's unlikely we're going to complete the work that we forecasted, we should tell the product owner right away. Tell the product owner right away, that way we can have a conversation about making some trade-offs, right? We can figure out what we want to do. However, if this is used as an enforcement tool to make sure that the team is working hard enough, or that like, hey, you guys better pick it up, maybe you need to come in over the weekend. Ugh, worst thing ever. So yeah, this is a terrible chart if it's used to beat up the Scrum team. But if it's a team if it's something that we use, a tool that we use internally, it can be beautiful. Yeah, it's good.
Something to mention about that. I was on a video a couple of months ago when the new Scrum Guide launched.
Yeah.
And they were talking about why things get removed from the Scrum Guide over time. And they made an allusion to the fact that people tend to weaponize some of the things that are in there. So the weaponization of a burndown chart means that the team's not using it for themselves. It's being used, to your phrase, beat them over the head with.
Yeah.
So as the Scrum Guide matures, they want to try to avoid that sort of situation of setting people up where there are things in the Scrum Guide that can be held over somebody's head when it's actually supposed to be something internally. It's like having, a speedometer in the car that tells the driver how fast they're going versus GPS monitoring on the car that tells somebody else how fast they're going.
Yeah, I dig that. Yeah. This is a great example of what I would consider a cockpit metric, right? If you're a pilot, there's a lot, like if you ever go in the front of a plane, there's all sorts of dials and gadgets and stuff that pilots need in order to fly the plane safely and effectively. But when you're on the plane, none of them really matter to you. All you want to know is, are we going to get there? Are we going to be safe? Is everything going to be good? And so this is a great example of something that can be useful to the people that are doing the work, but outside the work, not as much, right? Let's look at this next thing, which is what I call our little house of Scrum here, where we have our transparency and our inspection and adaptation with our base of trust. And underneath the trust, we have our Scrum values, which support the foundation of trust. And the question is, what are metrics good for in Scrum? It's inspection and adaptation. This is what Scrum is all about. This is what we do in our events. We inspect something and we adapt something. And so if we have metrics that can actually help us when we're doing this, well, I think that's something that can be useful. And so here's what I want us to think about is I want us to think about how we're going to use our events to actually inspect our performance. Because one of the things that I started thinking about is when we look at that primary measure of progress, It is that we have done work at the end of every sprint, at least at the end of every sprint, right? And so that's something that happens in the rearview mirror. We either did it or we didn't do it, right? And so this is kind of what led me to do this, is to create this workshop. Is there anything that we can do along the way? Now, I'm not going to tell you that all of the things we're going to discuss are all leading indicators, but some of them are. Some of the things that we'll talk about are leading indicators that we may be able to observe in our Scrum events that are going to help us kind of look at the performance of the team. So that's what we're getting ready to do together. Before we continue, this is my huge warning slide. I've got like all these pictures and everything, but I'm going to stress this. The stuff that we're going to go over that's coming right up, never, ever should be used against the Scrum team. In fact, most of the stuff that we're going to talk about is stuff to be used within the Scrum team, because I never, ever want anything that I produce to be used to harm people, to make people feel afraid or any of that stuff. It's for us to get better, right? One of the big things about Scrum is that there is an expectation that the team continuously improves. And so that's why I did this. So never use this against a Scrum team, always use it within the Scrum team and for the Scrum team to get better. So that being said, now we're going to get into it. Let's start off with our first event. Now I'll say this, of the events, if I ask people, hey, tell me the events of Scrum, this is the one that we're most likely to forget, right? Because what we do is we think, okay, well, there's that one where we get together and we plan out our stuff. Yeah, cool. And there's that one that happens daily. And since I'm the Scrum Master, I've heard I'm not supposed to say stuff. So weird. And then there's that one when we bring our stakeholders in. Then there's that one where we try to get better. Is there just 4? This is the one that people forget about. And the sprint is actually an event. It's a container event. The whole purpose of the sprint is for us to limit our risk. How does the sprint limit risk? Someone tell me.
If you're completely off track, you've only wasted 1 sprint.
Yes, thank you, Will. Yes, this is a way to make sure that we don't keep wasting time. We're going to get feedback, right? We're going to get feedback. That's the second thing on there. We're going to get feedback. And because we get feedback, we're going to find out, are we doing stuff that people care about, or are we doing stuff that's a waste of our time? Because that's one of the amazing things about the sprint, is it makes sure we don't waste too much of our time. And I don't know about you guys, but I've been on projects where we wasted months of our lives only to find out that we've produced something of exceptional quality that nobody wants. And that's heartbreaking. And that's one of the things we prevent when we're using Scrum, because we have this feedback mechanism. All right, so let's get right into it. So one of the things is, how was work today? Now, I'm going to tell you guys, this is something I learned about and I tried with my team, and it's a really simple thing that you do. All you do is you just create like a little chart that shows every day of the sprint. And you ask your team, how was work today? And now you'll notice something. It is a binary answer. It's either happy face or sad face. You know what my team asked me for? Everybody knows, right? Straight face. They're like, oh, does it have to be happy or sad? I'm like, look, if you're not happy, I'm sad, and I'm sad for you, right? It's either like, hey, work was good, or it wasn't. And if it wasn't, that to me is a sad face, right? And so here's what made it really useful, is we collected data and we watched how like this changed throughout the life cycle of the sprint. And we use it as a conversation tool in our retrospective. Now, you remember, I'm going to go back. I'm going to say this again. I got to go back here. If you use those sad faces to go after someone, it will lose all of its value. If it's not safe to put a sad face, you will get this. Everything's great. I'm having great days, over and over again. And it's going to be fake and it's going to be useless and it's just not going to work. As long as it stays within the team and as long as you don't get in trouble for having a sad face, but instead it starts a conversation, it helps us to look a little bit deeper. It's an amazing tool. It's an amazing tool to start uncovering some weird dynamics that can happen in a sprint. I saw it really highlighted the fact that we were still doing some handoffs. And there were people that were at the end of the handoff that were getting really stressed out. and they got stressed out towards the end of the sprint. And then other people got super happy towards the end of the sprint because like, shoo, man, that was cool. I got all my stuff done. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Your stuff, like your stuff and their stuff are different stuff. I don't know about that. Let's talk about that in the retrospective. So this was one of the ideas I wanted to share with you. Another one is that second one, cumulative overtime for the sprint. Now, this is kind of leaning into the Agile principle about sustainable pace. We want our folks to be able to work at a sustainable pace. Now, sometimes it sounds like that's a little bit off when we use the term sprint, because we think about runners who are sprinting, right? Like sprinters, they sprint for like 100 yards, maybe 200 yards, but like we don't do marathons. And really, when we think about Scrum, we are kind of doing marathons over and over again. So I don't want people to think like that when we see that word sprint, that like we are just like working absolutely our fingers to the bone every single second, but instead that we work at a sustainable pace. And so whenever I see a lot of cumulative overtime, sprint after sprint after sprint, I start to ask the team, why are you working all that overtime? Right? And maybe they're saying, oh, it's because we have to get all this stuff done. And that starts some interesting conversations about who selects work. Who selects work in sprint planning? You guys tell me. The work that we're going to get done, who selects it?
Development team.
Yeah, the Scrum team, but specifically, we've got 3 accountabilities on the Scrum team: the product owner, Scrum master, and developers. Who is it that does the selecting of work that they're going to try to get done during the sprint?
The developers.
Yes, the developers. Every product owner wishes it was us. Yes, we wish it was us, but sorry, product owners, not our deal. Not our deal. We're the ones that order it, but the developers on the team, they're the ones that are going to select the work. And so if we're constantly seeing a need for overtime, then maybe that's something that we need to look at is, hey, is there any external force that's making you feel pressure to take more work? If so, as a Scrum Master, can't let that stand. I want my team to be able to work sustainably, right? One more here in our sprint, changes to our current sprint. Now, there are some people that say we will not take any changes. Once our sprint starts, no product backlog items are going to be added. No product backlog items are going to be removed. And I'm like, oh, wow, what's it like to live in the perfect world? I've never been there. I've thought about it before. I've thought about how neat it would be to be there, but that's not the world I've lived in. I've lived in a world where we had to take in PBIs after the sprint started because some crazy thing happened. I've lived in the world where we thought we could get stuff done. And then as we started to unpack it, we're like, oh my gosh, this is huge. There's no way we're going to be able to get all this stuff done. And PBIs had to be removed. So here's what I'm looking for here. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. But I just want you to be aware of how many times are we adding PBIs to our sprint? What might we do if we are constantly, let's say that we're doing 2-week sprints and we're constantly having to add PBIs because the business conditions that we're in absolutely make it necessary. What might we suggest trying?
Shorten our sprint.
Oh man, you guys are so good. Yes, exactly that, right? So this is an indicator that our sprint length may be too long. It's actually going past our planning horizon. Our planning horizon says, look, we can really only plan about a week's worth of work, and then we start to get to that place where we're in danger of having to change it. If that's the case, hey, no problem. This is the world that we're living in. Why don't we just make our sprints shorter? That way we can be responsive and not have to disrupt our sprint. This is an indicator that will help us see that so that we can make that suggestion to check that out if we're a Scrum Master.
Yeah, that to me always feels like it is more in line with what Scrum is, which is not about navigating to a goal. It's wayfinding. You know, it's small adjustments as we go.
All right. So this is the sprint, our first event. These are some ideas. Let's look at our next one. Sprint planning. The purpose of sprint planning is for us to try to figure out what can we get done in the time box that we're allowing for ourselves, right? That's the whole purpose. What are we going to get done? And so the first one is a number of no-shows. What if we have people not showing up to sprint planning? That's no good, y'all. We want to make sure that we have the engagement of the entire team. What could happen if we don't have all the people? Don't say reduces planning effectiveness. Don't say that, because that's already on the sheet. What could happen if we don't have people show up? What could happen?
I mean, incorrect commitments by the people who are showing up and totally blowing the number off.
Okay, I dig that. So here's the deal. I don't show up for sprint planning, and then I get in, I'm like, there's no way. What we just signed up for is impossible. And I'm like, oh, wait, where were you? We could have used your voice, right? If there's something that you see that we all didn't see, then like you kind of shortchanged us from from what you see. And so what I'm looking for in the sprint planning is I'm looking for, it's all hands on deck, every single person that's on the Scrum team, and possibly some invited friends, some invited guests, right? So we want to just be aware of this. We want to be aware of when people aren't showing up to this event. And we also want to look for patterns. Is there something that's going on where maybe one of the team members doesn't show up, and we start to have a conversation with them one-on-one, right? Hey, I noticed you're not at sprint planning. What's going on? I hate sprint planning. Why do you hate sprint planning? Well, because me and Glenn, we get into arguments. Really? Okay, well, what's going on with that? And like you may unpack something. You may unpack some stuff that has to do with team dynamics, with the way that people are interacting with each other, which is awesome, because that's what we want, right? If we start to see that people aren't showing up because there's something weird going on with the team, let's deal with that weird thing that's going on with the team, right? All right, now there was some foreshadowing that happened. And let me think, was it Ryan? Was that you talking about sprint goals?
Yeah.
Okay, so check this out. Here it is in sprint planning. This is one of the measures, is have we created a sprint goal? If we do not have a sprint goal, just like Glenn said, that is the worst sprint goal in the world, is we don't have a sprint goal. But the reason why we don't have a sprint goal is sometimes because there is no cohesiveness to the work that we're doing. Or maybe that our PBIs are so granular. They're not talking about outcomes. They're not talking about ideas. It's move this here, do this just like this. It's really super specific. And so as developers and as a Scrum team, we don't understand why we're doing the work. It's just all we're getting is these orders that we fulfill, and we don't know why. This makes it really difficult to create a sprint goal. And so again, as Glenn said, then sometimes what happens is we resort to the second worst sprint goal. And the second worst sprint goal is do all the stuff. And we think that like that's just barely better than no sprint goal at all. But better sprint goals are ones where we're talking about outcomes, the reason why we're doing the sprint, the reason why people are going to care about the work that we do. That can be a really good sprint goal. And it's also one that makes us feel more connected to our work and gives us a higher sense of purpose. Does that make sense?
It's also sort of the elevator pitch. You run into somebody, not so much in the disconnected COVID days, but you run into something in the elevator higher up. Oh, what's your team working on this sprint? Well, we have 12 of these product backlog items, and one's going to do this. No, you have the goal. You can articulate that very clearly.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. It's a way to quickly talk about what's the vision for this sprint. I dig it. All right. The third one, and I'm going to tell you guys, this one's kind of controversial. It's a little bit controversial, and there's been conflict in the past, but I want us to talk about it, right? Is did we produce a useful sprint backlog? Now, here's the thing. As a Scrum Master, I can't tell my developers how to work, but I've seen crappy sprint backlogs. And you know what crappy sprint backlogs look like? The PBIs that were selected, and that's it. That's generally a pretty crappy sprint backlog, because then people just say, oh yeah, the daily Scrum, I don't even get why we do that event. It's lame, because all I do is today I'm going to keep working on that PBI I've been working on. See you tomorrow. Then you get up the next day. Today I'm going to keep working on that PBI I've been working on. See you tomorrow. Like, yeah, I agree. The daily Scrum stinks when you do that, right? But if what we've done is as a team, we've collaborated and we look at that PBI and we say, what do we need to do to make this done? Like, what are all the things that we need to do? And we just capture those ideas. We capture those things that need to be done, and we decompose our work into smaller pieces. What it allows us to do is have a greater level of transparency, to how are things going, right? It also provides some really great discussion times in that daily scrum for our developers, because you may have a developer say, hey, today I'm going to try to get this piece done. And then you have someone else on the team say, yeah, you know what? That's a part of our code that is a mystery to me. Would it be okay if I team up with you on this today? Oh, heck yeah, let's do this together, right? So if we have a useful sprint backlog that has a higher level of granularity around what we're actually going to try to do, it can be beautiful, because it can foster a greater degree of collaboration amongst our developers. If our developers aren't collaborating, they're missing out on one of the big parts of Scrum. So any thoughts around this one? Because sometimes I hear people come back at me on this one. What do you guys think?
So that's exactly what our CTO has been trying to convey to all of our development teams for the last few months. And I think it's uncanny the way you described it and the way he described it, so similar. But I totally agree with you that it's really important to understand how you're getting to done, and that you're having those discussions and not just this is what I'm doing today. I don't have any blockers for that. I think there's a lot of ways people can work together to get to done, but if you don't have that visibility into what you need to do, then you're never going to start collaborating.
What could cause? Thanks for sharing that, Ryan. And maybe you can add on to this, and it's open to anybody, not just Ryan. What could cause developers to not want to have that higher level of granularity or visibility? What could cause that?
Overall agile fatigue.
If they're trying to be measured on if there's accountability for, did you do this task? Did you do that task? From above.
Ah, yes.
Some micromanagement.
So if it puts me at risk, if I can get in trouble because I said I was going to try to get this done and I didn't, and it's like, oh, well, I guess you're not working hard enough, and maybe you don't know anything. And if it's negative, then absolutely, this is where I see tons of pushback. That's why I showed you a picture of transparency, inspection, and adaptation as the pillars of an empirical process control. On the bottom of it, though, trust. We absolutely have to have that trust, and this is why I just had to state it so so directly. If we use these to make people feel afraid, if we use these metrics to make people feel like they're getting called out, it's terrible. Because what we want is we want the team to feel safe with each other. We want them to also feel like, hey, together we're going to be accountable. So if we can do that within the team, it's beautiful. As soon as we expect someone outside the team to do it, toxic, terrible. Good discussion. Let's look at our next one, daily Scrum. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to be like, oh, hey, man, did you just recycle that one from sprint planning? Hey, let's not go back to it. Let's not worry about that. Let's just talk about that first one. Number of no-shows, right? Daily Scrum. If you have people not showing up to the daily Scrum, what's going on, right? As a Scrum Master, let me ask you guys this. As a Scrum Master, do I have to, according to the Scrum Guide, do I have to go to the daily Scrum? Say it again, no. Sanjay. You said it. You said no, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't have to.
Scrum Master, no, the team should run it.
Yes. And that's so crazy. Sometimes Scrum Masters are like, wait, what? I don't have to go. Yeah, you don't have to go. But you need to know that two things happened. One, that the daily Scrum happened. And two, it was kept within the time box. But this is one of those things where, as a Scrum Master, if I hear that, like, yeah, only half of the developers are showing up to the daily Scrum, I got questions. Why? What's going on? Is there not good collaboration that's happening? Then maybe I'm going to start observing. I want to observe the daily Scrum. I'll tell you about. I had a instance of people not showing up, and it was just people not showing up. And so I asked about it in the sprint retrospective, and like there was kind of like a grumbling that the people's commitment, and they just said it straight out. Hey, I got to take my kids to school, and that's it. And so easy solution to that, right? Someone tell me, what was the easy solution that we got to try out the very next sprint?
Change the time.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, let's just change the time then. When can you show up? Well, I'm all in at 9:30. Sweet. Let's move it. And then guess what? Problem solved. Easy, right? And so this is the thing, is number of no-shows, it can indicate that some kind of change is necessary. Now let's look at the late arrivals.
Sorry, just
Yeah,
to
go
add
ahead.
on to that.
Yeah.
You might have a conversation where I say, well, I don't want to wait till 9:30 to, say I've got an impediment or whatever. And the answer is nobody's stopping you. You can be collaborating all day long. The Scrum just happens to ensure that it happens at least once per working day.
Right. Exactly. And guess what? If you're waiting to talk about impediments in the daily Scrum, I'm not cool with that. If you have an impediment, you should be saying something immediately, right? Like try to get some help on that. Don't wait for the daily Scrum to just reveal impediments. Have the daily Scrum just be that time when you're planning what you're going to do for the day. And you could get started. You could actually, in the daily Scrum, well, hey, today I'm going to be working on this, which I've already started. That's okay. That's not a big deal, because all we're trying to do in the daily Scrum is come up with our plan of what are we going to do for the next 24 hours to get us closer to our sprint goal. And so it could be that, like, if you're the early riser, you've already gotten started. If you're the late riser, you're like, okay, cool. You're doing that. I'm going to work on this thing. Or, hey, now that I'm here, can I join you? Right? That's all we're looking for. Now, that second item, number of late arrivals, kind of like the no-show, except for if this is something that's habitually going on, do we need to change the time of the daily Scrum? And if it's not just if it's not an external factor that we can't control, are we getting the right level of engagement? Right. And so this is one that, if this one makes you feel kind of icky, and if your developer's like, hey man, hey, back off. Like, all I'm looking at is this is a 15-minute at max event. That's as long as it's going to be. And so if you show up late, you might miss some really important times to collaborate with your teams. So, the other developers on the team. So I'm curious about this one. If I start to see it, if it's happening, then I'm curious. It makes me wonder what's going on and ask questions. There's another controversy. I guess all of these are kind of controversial, right? On this one, because as Scrum Masters, we're like, hey, this isn't our deal. But this one right here, the number of tasks that roll over. This is one that I definitely don't want to be weaponized. I definitely don't want it to be abused. But it could be something where someone says, yeah, I think I'm going to be able to get this done today, but then they don't. Are they being called away to work on other stuff? If they're being called away to work on other stuff, that's something that I want to know about, because I look at that as an impediment. Now, some of us, like, that's just life though, right? Like we have our work that we do for this Scrum team, and then we have work that we do for another Scrum team, and then we also do production support, and we also do. Well, this is a great way for us to see this. If we're continually not getting stuff done that we thought we were going to be able to get done, then it's a conversation, right? Again, this is not so that we can, like, poke our developer and be a bad developer. You said you were going to get it done and you didn't. No, but if you've got stuff that's dragging you away, I want to know about it. And I want the product owner to know about it, because together we might be able to influence you not having to be working on so many different things. Good. All right.
I think the biggest part of the rollover is a lot of teams, or not a lot of, but some teams use it as an excuse, well, not to get stuff done. Well, I can just roll it over. I commit to this. Well, I can just roll it over to the next sprint. They don't actually commit to it. It's just a matter of, well, we'll just roll it over. That's not the purpose of that. When you plan it, you actually plan it with the purpose of getting it done with that sprint, not the purpose of, well, I'm just going to roll it over to the next one.
Sure. And that's more
as an excuse.
Yeah, and that's more at the sprint level of what Brad's telling us about. This is even smaller. This is that thing where we start looking at the sprint backlog as developers, and we say, you know what, I'm going to try to get this done today. Like that's what we should be doing, is we should be looking at, like, hey, what am I going to do to get us one step closer to our sprint goal? And if I said, hey, I think I'm going to get this done, then maybe that's what that's doing, is it's setting us up for some of our next steps, but then it doesn't get done because I got pulled away. That's what I want to expose with this. I want to expose that our team doesn't have the focus that they need, right? And that's one of our Scrum values is focus. We want our team to be able to be focused. And if we're getting pulled away to do a bunch of crazy stuff, then let's go deal with that, right? Like as a Scrum Master, view that as an impediment. If I see something where our team can't follow and practice the Scrum values, I should be concerned about that. Let's look at sprint review. All right, so I changed it a little bit, right? This was like number of no-shows. You're like, are you going to do it again? No, look, this is different. This is number of customers / stakeholders invited versus attended. So what this one's about, and I tweaked this one, right? Because at first I didn't have that invited versus attended, but sometimes like I've worked with teams that have a gazillion stakeholders, and like there's a gazillion stakeholders that are invited. However, they're personally invited when, hey, this is going to apply to you. This increment that we've got has some of your stuff in it. Or in sprint review, what we're going to be talking about is our next steps, which is going to include potentially some of your PBI. So I want to make sure you're there, right? You're not just on the invite. I'm talking about like, we're expecting you to be there. If they don't show up, I'm curious. Why aren't they showing up? Do they think that what we're working on is valuable? Do they still think that the stuff that they had mentioned before, is it still valuable to them? If it's not, we want to know about that, right? And so that's one of the ways that I want to find out is, are people coming to the sprint review that are external to the team? If not, then why? I just want to ask that question. I want to find out. I'm curious about that. That's one of the things that we're going to do as Scrum Masters is we're going to be curious. Here's another thing. When our stakeholders do show up, are they coming up? Are they coming in there empty-handed? Are they coming to our sprint review like it's a performance, right? Where they're like, oh, well done, Scrum team. You've created an increment once again. Well done. Like, that's not what a sprint review is. Our sprint review is supposed to be a collaborative working session. So what I'm expecting our stakeholders to do is, hey, you remember last sprint when we put this new functionality in there, how's it going? Is it doing what we thought it was going to do? Tell us. You're the ones that know, right? Tell us about it. What's changing in the marketplace, right? Our product does this. Is this still what people are excited about? You know, maybe they're from the contact center. Hey, we've been talking about you getting all these kind of calls about this one part. Is that still happening? If that this one part of our product, is that still going on? Because we put in a fix, so it should be less. What's happening, right? We want our stakeholders to come in and tell us stuff that we may not have visibility into, right? Last thing, number of changes to the product backlog. So why do we even bother with a sprint review? Someone tell me. It's potentially 4 hours of our life. If we're doing a 1 month sprint, it's potentially 4 hours. Why do we bother with this thing?
Well, we'd like our stakeholders to help us figure out the things that would be useful to do to achieve the goal that we've agreed on.
Yeah, absolutely. We want our stakeholders to have a voice in the direction of our product. And so what is the product backlog? The product backlog is just our collection of ideas, of hypotheses, right? It's the ordered list of all things known to be needed for the product. And so when we have these ideas that come from our interactions with our stakeholders, where should they go? The product backlog. And so if we have sprint reviews that do not end up changing anything on our product backlog, and our product backlog is this static thing that never changes and we're just knocking things off of it, I'm curious. As a Scrum Master, I'm like, wait, how come we're not learning anything? Well, we're learning stuff, really, because our product backlog hasn't changed. One of the things you'll hear me talk about when I do the training is we don't want to do long-term planning, because when we do long-term planning, what we're doing is we're following a plan when we were the dumbest. Sometimes I say that and people go, wait, what? You're saying I was dumb? I'm like, yeah. And then that's when I challenge people. I'm like, have you ever been on a project where you learned something as you went along? And everybody's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, me too. And so is everybody else. As we do projects, we learn as we go along through the project. And so if we're following a plan that we created at the very beginning, that's when we were the dumbest. because since then we've learned, and we've learned about what the product needs, what it should do. And so this is what we want out of our sprint review. We want changes to our product backlog. We want to have those new insights that are generated when we produce done work.
Sometimes that feels that is hard for people who have come from the waterfall side.
Yes, sir.
To say, and they're like, well, okay, so waterfall is we just write it with all the requirements and then we implement it. So now we're going to write all the requirements and then just break it up into 2 weeks. It's like, you're not just breaking it up into 2 weeks, which is why also a lot of times teams will take the done work, the undone work from a sprint and say, just roll it over.
Yep.
And I'm like, no, you have to reevaluate what was left undone in the sprint against everything else that's in the product backlog, because you may not work on that stuff automatically the next sprint.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting point that Glenn just made, is when we get to the end of the sprint and we have undone work, there's two things that can happen to it. It's either going to go back on the product backlog or not, because the product owner could be like, oh, this is now worthless. This is not like, but we were 90% done. Yeah, it would have been worth something if it was done, but now it's worthless. So deleted. We're just deleting that. Yep. Because this was a special promotion. We had a trade show, or maybe we're trying to get some sort of some mailer out, whatever it was. Right. So there's the possibility that the work that we started and didn't finish, we just got to get rid of it.
I have a question though. Can it be transferred to the next coming on sprint?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but here's the thing though.
Not automatically.
If you think about in terms of the done work becomes part of an increment, the undone work is not part of the increment. And so what happens is it goes back to the product backlog. Then we start the next sprint. In the next sprint, we go to sprint planning. And what do? We look at the stuff that's on the product backlog, right? And so that could include some of the undone work from our previous sprint, but maybe not, because the product owner might have kicked it out of there. Let's look at our sprint retrospective. So again, you see number of no-shows. Really, Blake, we're going to do this again? Yes, we're going to do this again. Now, I'll tell you about a specific one that I got to see here. Is when I was working with a team and they asked me, I was working as a team, I started working with the team as their Scrum Master, and they asked me this question: does our product owner have to come to the sprint retrospective? And I was like, what? They're like, oh, do they have to? I'm like, oh, since you said that, absolutely. Absolutely, they have to be here. And they're like, oh, ugh. Do I have to? Yes. If there is that kind of tension going on in the team, we must have the group there. And so again, this is the thing. Each one of these events is an opportunity for us to collaborate as a team. This one here is we're not just focused on our product, now we're focused on us. And so if you don't show up to the sprint retrospective, we're missing out. We're missing your voice. We're missing out on your experiences of what you've gotten to experience in this past sprint. And there may be things that are affecting you that aren't affecting some other folks, but we want to hear your voice. And so a no-show in the sprint retrospective, I mean, look, we're going to have vacation, stuff like that. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is people that say, hey, yeah, I'm not going to make because I got some other stuff I need to do. That's what I'm concerned about, right? I'm not concerned about people, taking time off or anything like that, unless it just so happens that they take PTO every single last day of the sprint and they've timed it out. Then I'm still curious. I'm like, wait, what's going on here? So number of no-shows, we still got to look at that. Then the second one, did we identify an improvement to make? So this is an interesting change. In the 2017 Scrum Guide, we would say that we must have an item from the sprint retrospective that goes on our sprint backlog. That's gone now. It's not in there in the 2020 Scrum Guide, because in the 2020 Scrum Guide, they looked at ways to make Scrum less prescriptive. And they felt like, hey, you know what? This is kind of prescriptive. We don't want this here. However, it is expected that we do identify an improvement. We need to have some type of actionable improvement that we're going to try to work on in the upcoming sprint. regardless of whether we put it into the sprint backlog. Now, can we still put it on the sprint backlog? Yes, we can. And it's a great thing if we do, because we're going to look at that sprint backlog every single day of the sprint, right? At least once a day. And so doing that's good. And it's not a bad thing. It's just not required anymore. But coming up with an improvement, that is required. Putting it on sprint backlog, not so much. And so we want improvements to be identified. That's the whole reason that we're doing this, right? This is where in the professional Scrum Master class, when I'm, and also the product owner class, when I'm telling people about the sprint retrospective, it's not just a complaining session. It's not just for us to grumble and be like, well, I didn't like that very much. Well, what are we going to do? How are we going to make our lives better? How are we going to make our product better? How are we going to make our team better, right? The third one, team NPS, Net Promoter Score. So this is something that we might want to track is, would you recommend joining this team to a close friend? And then we have that little scale, right? Strongly agree, somewhat agree. You know, we do that thing. And if we're seeing no, then we want to ask questions. We want to be curious. Why? What's going on? Well, I feel like we're not appreciated. I want us to feel appreciated. What do we need to do? Or, man, I wouldn't want to have them come here because, you know, our benefits suck. Something like that, right? Then, hey, I look at that as an impediment. We want good people here. If that's something that we need to address, that's something that we should look into. And this is the thing, Scrum Masters, our job's not just to deal with stuff on the team, it's to deal with what's stopping our organization from being successful. So sometimes this team NPS stuff, it can get into some of these really far out there areas, but it's good for us to know. Any other thoughts about our retrospective?
Making sure that everybody had the opportunity to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody didn't, like, you want to address that, make sure that, you know, reach out to them and make sure that they know that they have opportunity to say something.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we can do as Scrum Masters to vary the styles of facilitation that we use. I actually had a team that I was supporting, and like at first I thought, like, man, they're just not engaged. Like, we get into retrospectives, and we were using a verbal form of feedback, and I was like, man, this is so weird. They're just not into this. And so I tried a different facilitation technique and started to say, hey, let's get ideas out of our heads on stickies first, and then all of a sudden, boom, 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 all these sticky notes started to appear because people didn't feel good about just offering up stuff first. But then what happened was, when we allowed them to get ideas out of their head, they're not getting put on the spot to do an impromptu speech in front of everyone. And they got those ideas out. And then we started to look for patterns, and they started to see, I'm not the only one that feels this. Good stuff, right? So yeah, for sure. I think making sure that we're hearing other voices from the team, not just our extroverts, not just our people that are waiting for that microsecond of silence to know when to start talking. That's me. Sorry, guys. But yeah, that could definitely be added here, is making sure that that voices are heard. Cool. Thanks for sharing that with us. Any other thoughts?
I was going to say, I think there's an important nuance there. We said make sure everybody has the opportunity to speak. It's very easy to say you should make sure everybody speaks, and that's a totally different thing. Yeah. So yeah, I really like the way that both of you said that. Whoever suggested it, I missed that. Sorry. And then Blake, like the way that you talked about giving the opportunity and creating the space is really great.
Mm-hmm. The right to pass is very important. Yeah, we don't ever want people to feel like, you know, if I don't say something, I'm going to get in trouble. No, that to verbally engage, not required. So long as we create a way for us to hear from you in a way that's nonverbal. Because I do want people to engage, but like a lot of people don't feel cool about, like, you know, sharing in a large group. That's also why I asked you guys before we record this thing, are you guys going to be cool with that? Because I didn't want everybody to be like, oh gosh, I don't want to say anything. This is weird. You guys have done great. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for being part of this conversation, because I think this makes this a lot more fun. All right. So we've now talked about how we've got these ideas for how to use our events as a way to gather some data about our Scrum team performance. And so I got this question for you. What are you going to do? What now? On the left is like, well, that was interesting. Time for me to take a break. And I'm done. And I'm going to take some time off for the rest of the year. And it's done. It's on a shelf. This is done. I'm not going to do anything else with it. That's a possibility. Then there's another possibility. And that is take one idea and try it. And just so you guys know, one of the ideas that I shared with you was that how did today go? That was me going to, I think it was a presentation, and someone shared that. I'm like, oh, I like that. And I tried it. And so that's what I want you to do. Go back, check out this video. I'm also going to share with you, there's an export of this workshop. Not everything, it's mainly just those parts about, like, those different experiments to try, but you can get that on my website. And so I really want you to try it out. I want you to do an experiment, because I think that's how we get better in Scrum, is by doing experiments, by trying small things, learning from those, and adjusting and seeing how we can make things better. With that said, any questions? Totally open.
This may be kind of tangential, but I know you had a couple of metrics around the number of folks who participate in sprint planning and such, which leads to conversations about time zone differences, remote teams, overseas work, that sort of thing. So we probably don't have a lot of time to address it here, but if you've got any resources for, how to deal with the Scrum ceremonies, events and such in a distributed, work environment, that would be very useful, I think.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Especially when you have those perfectly diametrically opposed time zones, because here's the deal. No matter what, someone's going to have a long day, right? And so really what it's about is having the team, this geographically dispersed team, to figure out together what's okay. Right? What's okay? Is there a large group of folks that are cool with staying late and they can do stuff? Is there a group that's good with getting there early? The best thing I can say is, if you must have geographically diverse teams, then look for that common ground. Look for that compromise, and make sure that people understand it's a way of showing respect. It's to your other teammates to give a little bit, and not just say, well, we do it at 9 a.m. Central Time and best of luck to everybody else. That doesn't feel good to me that much, right? But use it as an opportunity to respect each other, to show kindness to each other. The other idea too is this an opportunity where we could have more than one team? And this group of people, they don't have to stay up super late because we're all working on the same stuff. And maybe that's a thing, but yeah, that's my ideas.
This is a little tangential also, but quick question. On stakeholder collaboration, we've kind of got this model where the product owner is the proxy for all the stakeholders. Have you seen that work or not work? Any comments on that?
Yeah, as much as possible, I want the Scrum team, which includes all the developers, I want them to have access to the actual stakeholders and not just the product owner. And the reason why is it reduces the telephone game effect. Like they're actually getting to see the feedback from the stakeholders. And also there's a motivator there. There was a group that I worked with, and they did a lot of the data backend stuff. And they felt very disconnected from the stakeholders, from the internal customers. And then we got them engaged in the actual sprint review for the front end and also the back end. We brought everybody in together. And I remember that there was a sprint review where our stakeholders said, "Oh, you know what I like? I like that when you pull up this drop-down box, that it's pulling from this database, and this database, because it gives us that whole look at the different options that we can choose." And I saw these developers nudge each other and smile, because they're like, "Oh, that's our stuff." Like the customer, the stakeholders, they actually are talking about the work that we did, and it made them feel more connected to the work. And so, I think there's a lot of really great benefits from the entire team being there in the sprint review, so that they can have that that face time so they can have that better interaction and collaboration with the stakeholders.
Great, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, I think you had something?
Yeah, thank you. So we have stakeholders that'll come to our sprint reviews, but we feel like they're not, there's a perception that they're not ready or equipped to have conversations about the team's backlog and what would be good to do or valuable to do in the next sprint. And so we don't. We do a demo and then ask if they think it was good, and then they'll go, and then we'll roll into a retrospective and do planning the next day. So have you had success or are you aware of ways that you might start to bring stakeholders in a more collaborative way and get them to the point where they're comfortable going through the backlog with the team?
Yeah, for sure. Like to me, this is some of the stuff that Scrum Masters and product owners do with the stakeholders, is we help them like see how, if they come with questions, if they come with insights, that it's valuable. Matter of fact, one of the things that I'll tell my product owners is, in a sprint review, you can hear a product backlog item being spoken into life. Here's what it sounds like. Ooh, I like that. You know what else would be cool? When you hear, you know what else would be cool? What you're hearing is a product backlog item being spoken into life, right? Now, if you don't listen to your stakeholders, if you don't listen to your customers, don't expect them to show up anymore. And then just so we're clear, because I gave you the happy path, like I gave you the happy, ooh, you know what else would be cool? It comes the other direction too. It goes like this. Oh, that's what it does? You know what it should do. Now, when you hear that, you've got to be open to hearing that and not get yourself in that defensive posture of like, well, now I've got to defend. No. Don't defend. Listen. Be curious about what they're asking for. Be curious about what it is that they find valuable, because that's the whole purpose of this. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps a lot. The idea that they don't need to be engaging with you on the, technical level, or even on the, right, definition of a user story level, but it's, right, these are my thoughts, these are my impressions, this is what I think would be valuable. And then it's up to us to turn that into a PBI or to adjust a PBI based on their feedback, and
love that,
to take that into planning. Yeah,
that's
really
experts.
Really great.
Sorry.
No, just saying that's a really great perspective, and it's so simple, but we hadn't thought about it that way, or at least I hadn't. So.
Yeah, our customers, our stakeholders are experts in sharing problems. They are wonderful collaborators in saying, here's the problem that we face. Where we've got to be careful is when they say, and no, here's what you should do about it. And then we're like, oh, okay, yeah, we just crossed that problem sharing part to you solutioning. And so we've got to be careful of that, because sometimes what will happen is our stakeholders will tell us what to do. You should do it like this. It should be here, it should be positioned like this, and there should be a drop down, and there should be this and this and that. Like, and then when it gets to that, then we start to take away the creativity of the team, and like that doesn't always work out good. Most of the time it doesn't. So yeah, we've definitely got to be careful of that. What else?
Yeah,
maybe one more
so much.
question? Yeah, absolutely. All right, looks like we got a little quiet, so I'm going to move to this. Thank you so much for your engagement. Thanks for asking questions. Thanks for speaking up. It was really cool getting to hang out with my friends from Atlanta. I'd like to encourage all of you, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to stay connected with you. You can find me on LinkedIn if you put in Blake McMillan, and then there's the actual link. If you want to go check out my website, soloscrum.com, that's where you'll see that. If you go to the resources tab, that's where you'll see the export for the Exploring Scrum Team Performance. If you want to go try some experiments, I think it's updated, and if it's not, you can give me some heat for that and be like, come on, dude, update your website. And I probably should. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. So please do connect with me. Let's stay connected. I appreciate this time that we had together. Thanks for having me out here.